So, I mean, this is seriously, if you're watching the news, you're paying attention to the news. The Russians hacked our elections. We've been taken over by the Russians. Children are being shot, gunned down right and left. We're just a crisis of school shootings. And the president is out of his mind and needs to be removed from office. All of which would be completely true if it weren't totally false. I mean, none of those things is happening. I mean, look, this country is divided right now. It's very hard to bring together Americans and Democrats. I mean, it's very tough. We've really fallen into two sides. We've fallen into the side of Americans and crazy Democrats on the press. And there's always crises in the country. There's always something where I can turn to. I've been talking about homelessness and the international sex slave trade and all this. These are things that are really dire and important. Abortion is dire and important. But the stuff that this is a press that has been caught in the center of a massive cover-up. They are the instruments of cover-up, the press, covering up the Obama administration's misuse of the IRS and the State Department, all those things we're talking about in the opening, the Justice Department. Apparently, it looks like Obama's spying on another presidential campaign, an opposing presidential campaign. Unbelievable stuff. And they covered it up. And now these indictments come down, right? 13 indictments of Russian nationals from the Mueller investigation. Now, you have to understand what this is, right? These guys were kind of accused of trolling our election. They would go out and stage rallies. They would contact people. They started doing this in 2014. So all these intelligence guys like James Clapper saying, "Oh, this is all Trump's fault." It was their fault. They weren't watching these guys and they came in. Are we doing this in other countries? Yes. Have they been doing this in every election? Yes. That's the first thing. So this was a kind of small, trolling operation. These guys will never be tried. They're all in Russia, so we'll never know whether these charges are true or not. We have to presume they're innocent until guilty. But everything they were doing, some of this stuff was incredibly stupid. In Florida, they staged a rally for Trump. So they say after a certain point, they were militating for Trump and Bernie Sanders. They're playing down the Bernie Sanders stuff, but basically they just wanted to shake up the election. So discord, play on the things that divide us. So discord, get to the guys that they thought were the most extreme. They thought, obviously, that the best thing for the country would be Hillary Clinton getting elected. That's why they were trying to prevent her from getting elected. So basically, they agreed with the New York Times. So the New York Times and the Russians thought that the best thing would be for Hillary Clinton to be elected. And both of them acted so stupidly that they couldn't pull it off. But, they staged one of the things they did was stage a rally for Trump in Florida. 15 people showed up. 15 people showed up. Trump staged a rally for Trump and 15,000 people showed up. So these guys were complete incompetent. I have to tell you, when I look back, I know I keep talking about this because I've actually never seen the press engage in a cover-up of the extent they are of Obamagate, Obamagate's misuse of the IRS, Obama's misuse of the State Department, Obama's misuse of the Justice Department. When I look at this, when I see how corrupt the Obama administration was, I feel with the Trump election, I feel like I was saved from a burning building. And the arsonist is telling me that the fireman cheats on his wife. That's basically what it is. This country was in genuine trouble under Obama. Trump got us out of it. And now they're saying, but he slept with a porn star. And I'm like, that's wrong. But I don't care. I'm so glad you corrupt, dirty socialist guys did not win this election. I just am. And people keep saying, well, it's whataboutism. You're letting Trump off the hook for such and such. I'm not letting him off the hook for anything. I'm waiting for someone to name the way he has transgressed the Constitution. Name the way he has broken the law. Name the way he has made me less free, and I will condemn that. I do condemn some of the way he talks and some of the things he does. I'm certainly not in favor of cheating on your wife, especially if she looks like Melania. That's a joke. I'm not in favor of cheating on your wife. Nothing to do with that. It's just that if he's the president, if he's not breaking the law, if he's not transgressing the Constitution, as Obama so evidently did while the press looked on applauding, it's not that big a problem for me. So meanwhile, we have this horrible shooting in Florida, and, you don't want to run it down, but you don't want to play it down. But CNN is using these traumatized kids. In fact, all of the people were doing it. They're doing it on NBC, I think, as well, and ABC. They're using these traumatized kids to try and get your guns away, to try and repeal the Second Amendment. Let's just look at a quick clip of this. I find this shameful.
You said that the governor And Senator Rubio murdered 17 people. Why?
It's Rick Scott and Marco Rubio who allow this to happen. They are enablers, and the blood of 17 people and all those injured and all the families that have been hurt, this is all on them. They have us thinking that this is inevitable and that we can't do anything to stop it. It's too difficult. We're done with that. The GOP has abandoned us and left us to people like Nicholas Cruz.
This is for any of you to respond to. This is what Speaker Ryan said.
We need to think less about taking sides and fighting each other politically and just pulling together.
I disagree with that statement because it's very clear that there are two sides to this, and there are certain people that accept money from the NRA, and I believe Speaker Ryan is one of those people.
Now, those who will disagree with the framing of what you just said and what we're hearing from others is that the NRA didn't purchase the gun, the NRA didn't pull the trigger, the NRA didn't conspire to kill.
They might not have pulled the trigger, but they're who allowed him to buy the gun. Someone who isn't even allowed to buy alcohol legally is allowed to buy a war weapon? Like, where does that make sense?
First of all, I'm so sorry this happened to these children. I'm so sorry that they were in this school. But who cares what they think? They're kids. They're children. Who cares what their opinions are? A. And B, they could find no child in that school, not one child to stand up for gun rights. You know, they were condemning Marco Rubio for murder, and he came out with a statement. None of the major shootings that have occurred in this country over the last few months or years that have outraged us, in none of those cases would gun laws have prevented them. So the Washington Post went out to fact check them, which usually means just debunk Republicans. But in fact, they said, no, he's right. In each case, gun laws would not have done a thing. So why am I listening to that? Why is that not? You know, Henry Rassett at Ricochet, one of the Ricochet is this wonderful site where they were the ones who posted Another Kingdom when we were putting that out. And they're a wonderful center-right site where they let people post responsible posts, even if they're not part of the Ricochet staff. He put out these statistics. At the current rate, an American high school student faces a risk of being murdered in a school shooting in a year of about 0.0014%. That is 1 in 71,000. You have 1 in a 71,000 chance. Based on last year's crime statistics, the overall probability of a person in the U.S. being murdered in a year is about 0.005%. That's about 1 in 20,000. Also based on last year's crime statistics, a citizen of St. Louis, Baltimore, New Orleans, or Detroit, 4 cities where combined there has not been a Republican in office since, I believe, the Jurassic Age, okay, including children in those cities, has a risk of being murdered in a year of about 0.049%. That's 1 in 2,000. That's pretty big if you're talking about murder. So St. Louis, Baltimore, New Orleans, Detroit, every place that's governed by Democrats, and by the way, many of those have very strict gun laws, 1 in 2,000. If the current rate continues, there'll be about 24 school shooters this year. Based on a reasonable definition of what that means, their total victims will constitute about 0.5% of all American homicides. 16,000 murders will probably be committed this year. About 2/3 of them will be committed by males between the ages of 17 and 35. And the 30 most violent cities in America represent about 6% of the U.S. population, but they account for 1/4 of all murders. If these guys, you know, what we should really be doing is we should be confiscating America's Democrats. If we could just repeal the whatever it is in the Constitution that allows there to be Democrats, I think the murder rate would drop substantially. Here's from Pew. Violent crime in the U.S. has fallen sharply over the past quarter century. The 2 most commonly cited sources of crime statistics in the U.S. both show a substantial decline in the violent crime rate since it peaked in the early 1990s. One is an annual report by the FBI of serious crime. It goes on and on just saying that crime is dropping. So in other words, all weekend long, you were hearing about this terrible crisis. If there is a crisis in this country right now, it's not Russia. It's not the crime rate. It's not Russia, which had no effect on our elections. And by the way, in that indictment, when Rod Rosenstein was talking about that, he said that there was no evidence in the indictment of collusion either. So it's not Russia if there's a crisis. It's not the crime rates if there's a crisis, because crime is going down. And it's not the president's mental state. He's a great big character with a lot of weird and eccentric habits, but he's obviously not mentally ill or insane in any way. The really problem is the fact that we depend on to tell us what's going on, the media that we depend on, are in a state of complete and utter hysteria based that has arisen from the fact that they are desperately trying to cover up the way they covered up the Obama administration's malfeasance. They are covering up their cover-up, and it is driving them insane. The media is in crisis, but the country is not.